I'm John Heilemann.
And I'm Mark Halperin. With all due respect to Alexander Hamilton, this is the second time you've lost a duel. "14 times this President of the United States has made a statement in public about a shooting. Today, the news out of Charleston was on TV screens and news sites across the country, prompting elected officials, whether they're running for president or not, to respond with statements of their own. At the White House earlier today, President Obama turned the conversation to an issue he's been unable to make significant progress on in office: gun violence.
I've had to make statements like this too many times. Communities like this have had to endure tragedies like this too many times. We don't have all the facts, but we do know that, once again, innocent people were killed in part because someone who wanted to inflict harm had no trouble getting their hands on a gun.
John, in this story that implicates race, gun violence, and an important political state, what are the implications for politics of what happened today in Charleston?
Well, look, Mark, we've seen this is a tragedy, obviously. We've had too many of them. We've seen pretty much every presidential candidate express condolences to the victims' families. People have canceled their events in South Carolina for today, tomorrow, and probably for some days going forward. I think, sadly, that the political implications of this are going to be pretty small. To the extent there are any, there may be some on the Democratic side, where Bernie Sanders has gone farther than anybody else by labeling this an act of terrorism, and that's going to put some kind of pressure on Hillary Clinton. But I think that, broadly speaking, there aren't going to be many political implications, and that is too bad.
I said what happened today, of course, has happened last night. I think that there's a chance that this could be a little bit more resonant within the context of a discussion about the future of the country, because it is South Carolina. I think it's going to be a long while, and the primary is early next year there on both sides. It's going to be a long while before anyone goes to the state talking about winning support and talking about the future of the country without referencing the horrible events there. And I think whether they are specific or not about guns or race relations, I think there will be a sense in which the country needs to be somewhat introspective, and I think the smart and strong leaders will talk about that.
Well, again, the white-on-black nature of this, obviously almost historic in the sense there have not been that many black lives taken in one act of white violence in a long time, and we have had a lot of racial discussions recently. This may enhance the urgency around those discussions a little bit, but again, I fear it will be too little. In any case, all right. Also going on in Washington today, Ralph Reed is hosting his Faith and Freedom Coalition policy conference. In a way, it's just another Republican cattle call, but this one has a little extra emphasis on piety. Day one featured Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, and Ted Cruz. Here's a little taste of how they carried the banner of religious freedom.
Religious liberty has never been more threatened in America than right now today.
You cannot have strong families with a government that strong arms parents and our faith.
We're borrowing $1 million a minute. We hardly have money for anything if you look at it. But couldn't we start, by not giving money to countries that hate us, burn our flag, and persecute Christians?
The government is not meant to replace moms and dads. It is meant to empower them. And it is not meant to marginalize churches and synagogues. It is meant to protect them and their constitutional right.
I believe 2016 will be the religious liberty election.
Mark, Ted Cruz also talked briefly and perfunctorily about the gay marriage case on which the Supreme Court is about to rule. But for the most part, all three of these candidates today avoided directly engaging with the perennial Republican hot-button issues in the cultural realm, like abortion. So, Mark, there are still a bunch of Republicans hopefuls left to address this conference. But on the basis of what we've heard today, what can we discern about the shape of the 2016 debate on social issues in the GOP?
Well, it's not just today, but also if you look at the announcement speeches of most of the candidates who are already in the race and the rhetoric of the others, they really are, in terms of their rhetoric and their emphasis, they're playing up of religious liberty and some of the controversies we've seen in the last few years. They're playing down right to life. They're playing down gay rights. And I think That's because their pollsters are telling them your chances of winning the election hinge on, even if you care about these issues, talking about them less, emphasizing them less. The religious liberty issue, though, is a hot one that stirs people up, and I think they think is less controversial.
Well, right. I mean, religious liberty is obviously, in a lot of cases, not all, but in a lot of cases, a kind of coded way of talking about the gay marriage debate. The Republicans recognize where the country is now on gay marriage, which is to say it's moved pretty much in its favor, and it's about to be the law of the land. So there's a lot more coded talk, but I agree with you. There's no doubt that this is going to be a less social issue drenched election than some of them in our recent past.
The candidate who's most aggressive in some ways on abortion now is Carly Fiorina, the only woman in the Republican field. All right. This week, Donald Trump said some things that were pretty out there about Mexicans coming across the U.S. border. Today in Las Vegas, Hillary Clinton said some things at the NALEO meeting that could be interpreted as a reply to Mr. Trump.
I don't have to wait to become president to take a stand right here and right now against divisive rhetoric that demonizes immigrants and their families. It's wrong, and no one should stand for it. Did the people who feel so much hatred and anger never look in the mirror and realize that they, too, are fellow human beings?
So, John, that was an apparent and thinly veiled shot at Mr. Trump. Apparently also in an interview with our friend John Ralston out in Las Vegas, Hillary Clinton was more direct on taking on Trump. Jennifer Epstein reports. Is Hillary Clinton politically smart to take on this issue through the prism and the device of Donald Trump?
Well, yeah. I mean, I thought she was very strong on this. I think she seemed like she really means it. I think that's good for her when she seems authentic and authentically upset. And I think in terms of both Democratic nominating electorate and the dynamics there, and in terms of the general election and her connection to Hispanic voters, this is all good politics for her.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. We've seen her before talk about immigration and be fired up. And I think while it's clearly a base issue and one where she doesn't want anyone to get to her left, it's something she believes in. And lastly, it's clear that she and her advisors feel, even in the context of a general election, this puts her on the offense. And whether it's Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush, it's going to be hard for Republicans to keep up with her on immigration without risking some backlash on their side.
Right. And also, to be clear, what Trump said about Mexicans was pretty outrageous, and so he deserves a shot for that. All right. Here's a headline that's long overdue. There's finally going to be a woman on an American greenback. And since the news broke last night, everyone's been speculating about who it might be. Some of the suggestions are definite possibilities. Harriet Tubman, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and other non-Harriet women's rights advocates and historically significant patriots. Other suggestions, a little more fanciful and sometimes even downright silly. But this race is as wide open as the Republican primary. Mark, a woman on the 10 spot. Who you got?
Well, there are a lot of great choices, and this is a fantastic development for the country on all sorts of things. But I say Eleanor Roosevelt. Maybe a little bit controversial, but she is a historic figure and leader in her own right, not just as a first lady. And she stands for a lot of great American values that will long be part of the American tradition. She inherited some, but she really emphasized and amplified others.
I am interested in a twofer on this one, Mark. I want to get a woman on the 10 spot, and I also want to get an African-American on some currency. So I'm looking at Harriet Tubman is the favorite to a lot of people. She's great, but I want to go also for modernity. So I'm picking Rosa Parks, of course, civil rights pioneer, the woman who wouldn't give up that seat on the bus and was such an instrumental figure in the civil rights movement. I think it'd be awfully great to see her on a $10 bill.
That's a great choice. And I got to say, you know, this is the kind of thing that you think in this country, long overdue, amazing that it hasn't happened before, and fantastic that it's going to happen now. And I think the debate is great, too, because there's going to be a lot of discussion now about the relative merits of a lot of truly historic, significant figures who happen to be women.
It'll be a few years before we get these bills, but this will look good on Barack Obama's legacy that he got this done.
Yep. All right, coming up, two historic women in their own right, Carly Fiorina, my interview with her. But first, America's National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, pays us a visit after this.
President Obama's National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, came by our studio yesterday. We talked to her about her job. Excuse me. and also the job that Hillary Clinton had at the State Department. We started by discussing the deal that the United States is trying to make with Iran over its nuclear program.
The first question we have for you is about Iran. We have this June 30th deadline coming up. How firm is that deadline?
Well, look, we have made June 30th a serious deadline and target. We are trying to get this done by then. However, if you look at what's happened the last few rounds, when we did the interim agreement, and then in April when we had the agreement, the framework agreement that was signed in Switzerland, it ran a few days over. So I don't think anybody should anticipate that that couldn't happen again.
There's a lot of pressure on you guys from Congress to get a better deal. If Congress were to say we won't initiate new sanctions if we go past the deadline, would there not be a case for extending the deadline to try to get a better deal?
Well, first of all, if the only deal we're going to get is a good deal. If we don't get a good deal, there's not going to be a deal. And we've been very clear that if we're able to get the deal implemented and finalized that meets the same parameters that were agreed in April in Lausanne, it will be a good deal. It will cut off all of Iran's potential pathways to a bomb. It'll ensure that we are able to validate that they are not pursuing a nuclear weapon. And that's the point. If, however, and it's still quite possible that in the context of our negotiations, we're not able to get all of the elements that we believe were agreed in Lausanne finalized and formalized, or if they backtrack, or if on some of the remaining issues we can't bridge the gaps, there might not be a deal.
When I ask a little bit about Russia and Vladimir Putin, there's two schools of thought about the former Soviet client states, whether more American troops there, maybe weapons there, would that deter Putin, or would that provoke him in a way that would be not in America's interests?
Well, NATO partners collectively have already increased their rotating continuous presence in the Baltics and in Poland. We have already pre-positioned additional equipment. But this is not to threaten Russia. That's not the aim. It's to give our allies confidence that we will be there with them and for them, as we are all committed as 28 NATO allies.
What would you say are the three biggest accomplishments of Secretary Clinton when she was Secretary of State?
Well, I think, first of all, you'd have to put them in the context of the administration's accomplishments.
Anything that she participated in a meaningful way?
She participated in everything that we did in the first term in a meaningful way. Well, first of all, in the first term, we were able to bring to conclusion 2 long and costly wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And she was very much involved in supporting those transitions. In the President's first term also, we initiated and now have sustained what we call the rebalance to Asia, the Asia-Pacific, where we have substantially increased our security commitment, our economic engagement. We've been, as you well know, negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. To bring that to fruition, we're looking forward to obtaining trade promotion authority from Congress. That's another significant accomplishment. And then, since you asked specifically about Secretary Clinton, I mean, she, along with the President, was very much engaged in some of the signature development initiatives of this administration that I think, when all is said and done, will be things we look back on with a great deal of pride. We have elevated the role of development, support for civil society, for women, for voices that have been left out, and we have launched critical initiatives that have been life-saving in the realm of health and food security, and Power Africa, which is an electricity initiative. So she was integrally involved in all of the major initiatives of the first term of the administration.
And on your second one, so she was instrumental in moving the trade agenda forward.
No, she was instrumental in formulating and implementing the rebalance to Asia,
right.
Of which the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a part. Now, in the years since she's left, Ambassador Froman, who's our trade representative, right, has been leading the effort to get that deal done. It's almost done, and when it's done, we'll obviously want to be able to submit it to Congress for their approval in the vein of trade promotion authority.
We don't have that much time left in this administration, and one of the core promises the President made before he came in was that Gitmo would be closed. By the time President Obama leaves office, will Gitmo be closed, or will it remain open?
John, we are deeply determined, and President more than anybody, to close Guantanamo. It's going to be a very heavy lift. but we're going to do everything we possibly can to get that done.
And what does that entail at this? What has not been done over the course of this administration that could have been done, or what's left to do that will get that
accomplished? What has been done is we have managed to transfer the prisoners that have been cleared for transfer, tens of them, to third countries where we have confidence in the assurances we've received that they will be adequately monitored. And so the population of Guantanamo is down substantially from the beginning of the administration. There are more that have been cleared for transfer that we want to be in a position to repatriate to or return, resettle to third countries. And then there's a hardcore that will remain that we believe are too dangerous to be transferred. We've unfortunately had great difficulty with Congress that has imposed additional restrictions at various points, and at some point they've made them harder, sometimes they've eased them up a little bit. And what we really would like is to work with Congress to arrive at an understanding as to how to reach a final disposition, particularly for those hardest cases.
But in the end, there is no actual assurance that this will get done by the time President Obama leaves office.
John, we are going to do our very best to get this done. And I can tell you the President of the United States, more than anybody else, is committed to do so.
Okay. Susan Rice, thank you very much.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Our thanks to Susan Rice, and we'll be right back with a conversation with Carly Fiorina after this.
Last week at Mitt Romney's E2 Summit out in Utah, we saved some time to sit down with Carly Fiorina. She's towards the bottom of most polls in the Republican field right now, but she hopes to get on the debate stage, and honestly, the other candidates probably want that too, so the debates don't look like a private meeting at Augusta. We started our conversation by talking about how Fiorina wants to be the first female president of the United States.
If you become president of the United States, you will be the first female president. You're not running as a woman. You're not, emphasizing that necessarily. But how would you feel about being that historic first person if that's what happened?
Well, perhaps the way I felt when I became the first woman CEO to lead a Fortune 50 company. At that time, I actually, honestly, was quite unprepared for all the media attention that the historic first drew. Shame on me, I guess. But I'm sure what I would feel is I have a heavy responsibility now. And I have to execute that responsibility on behalf of everyone, men and women, Republicans and Democrats for that matter.
So in 2008, when I covered Hillary Clinton on the campaign trail, women would come up to her all the time, old, young, in between, and they would say with manifest emotion how excited they would be to be able to cast their vote for the first woman president. I've not seen that happen to you, but I'm sure it must, right?
Yes, it does.
Does that touch you in some way or not?
Of course it does.
Just enunciate how you feel about it.
I will tell you how it shows up. I have a lot of men who come up and say, I'm really excited about your candidacy, and they're excited because I'm not a politician. They're excited because I talk common sense. When women come up to me, they'll say all those same things, but they'll have a different look in their eye. Sometimes they'll have tears in their eyes.
So you mentioned the notion of the playing field not being level. There's some laws on the books and some court decisions that are intended to, federal laws, intended to try to level the playing field regarding gender. Some people, a lot of Democrats, would like to see more. Is there any area in which you think the national government, federal government, should do more to create a more level playing field on the issue of gender?
Yes, they should move to a meritocracy in the federal government instead of protecting seniority systems. Every federal government bureaucracy is a seniority system. Every union is a seniority system.
Benefits men who've been there longer.
That's right. It disadvantages women.
Any others? I'm not dismissing that one, but I'm just wondering.
Well, I think that's a huge one. It would have enormous ramifications. We've seen, by the way, when government overreaches to try and help women by, for example, mandating too much paid leave. We've seen in places like Chile or Spain or Europe where that backfires tremendously on women. Here's the thing. Here's an interesting statistic. Male-run companies receive $1.9 roughly billion in venture capital money from Silicon Valley. Women-owned companies receive $32 million.
What we call less.
A lot less. Government can't fix that. That's about attitude. Right. Or here's another interesting fact. 84% of women agree that a woman is just as capable of holding a senior executive position as a man. 43% of men agree with that statement. This is about attitude
and
now.
then societal issues, and obviously no one thinks that problems like that necessarily. A lot of people would say there's no government role in that. But let me just button up that issue before we move on. Are there any other federal laws you'd like to see that would be aimed at dealing with any aspect of a lack of level playing field on gender?
I think most of the government action that should be contemplated, in my mind, would have two characteristics. One, it ought to be contemplated at the state level, not the federal level, because we're a very diverse country with very diverse economies, and one size never fits all. Second, I believe it's always important for the federal government, if it's going to intervene, to regulate or legislate the floor, not the ceiling, the minimum necessary, not the maximum necessary. Because when government, and it almost always does, when government overreaches and goes for the maximum, which is what Democrats always want to do, it always ends up backfiring. We see it in every conceivable case, including now with Obamacare.
We've had several waves of feminism in America. Is there anyone from any of those waves who you would cite as a hero?
Well, of course. Look, women
I would just ask you to cite someone specifically.
Well, Susan B. Anthony, Gloria Steinem, they're all heroes in their own way, because when someone challenges the status quo, that's heroic, even if I don't always agree with them. But I think what's happened is that heroism to challenge the status quo and to stand up and say, you know, women are equal to men, and so we should have the same opportunities as men. What's happened is that's turned into a political ideology, and that political ideology is very specific. And so when women of the left tell me that I'm a threat to women's health, or tell me that I'm offensive as a candidate, that's not about women, that's about ideology.
So a lot of Republicans, and I believe you share this view, think that Democrats have, for craven political purposes, created this notion of a war on women, and that they've gotten away with it to some extent. I just want to see a big 30,000 feet macro analysis of politics, media, culture. Assuming that premise is correct, how have they gotten away with it from your point of view?
Well, I think they've gotten away with it because for too long we haven't taken them on. We've sort of let that narrative play out. And we shouldn't, and we can't.
You and I have talked about other issues beyond this basket, and we will again, but I appreciate the chance to visit with you on this topic, which is of interest to people, so thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Carly Fiorina, and we'll be right back after this.
We're live, occasionally on television, but we're live 24/7 on BloombergPolitics.com. Please take a look at Victory Lab mad scientist Sasha Eisenberg's piece about the top-tier Republican candidates using data in new ways to win voters.
Tomorrow here on the program, we'll have a very personal conversation with South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. Remember, with all due respect, is on twice a day at 5 and at 8. Until tomorrow, sayonara.